You are listening to Leaders and Legends, a podcast presented by Veteran Strategies, an Indiana-based public relations enterprise, and federally certified veteran-owned small business. I'm your host, Robert Bain, along with our producer, Chris Spangle. Our podcast is featured on the All Indiana Podcast Network in partnership with Wish TV. You may find Leaders and Legends at allindianapodcastnetwork.com. Thinking of starting a podcast or need to host a public meeting? Let Leaders and Legends LLC be your partner as you look for new ways to communicate your message. Please contact us at chris@leadersandlegends.net. As always, all our podcast interviews are dedicated to the legacy and generosity of P.E. McAllister. Our guest today is one of the most remarkable historians writing today. She is also, I hate to use a Midwestern United States term, she's also sweet as pie. Tracy Borman, thank you so much for coming on your third trip to visit us on the podcast.
Wow, we would call that a hat trick here in England. And I have to say, I think you've just given me my favorite introduction. I like being sweet as pie. That means more than the historian stuff. So thank you.
Your book. Now, I don't know if the absolutely delightful and brilliant Nicola Tallis listens to this podcast, but
sure she does.
Isn't she just brains incarnate?
The best.
Dr. Tallis, let me just say this. I apologize to you because I found Dr. Borman's book so enthralling that I actually dog-eared a few pages, which I know is anathema to Dr. Tallis. So I'm just apologizing before we start the interview.
Oh, yeah. I'm sure she'll forgive you.
We are discussing today on the podcast a new book by Dr. Borman titled, The Stolen Crown, Treachery, Deceit, and the Death of the Tudor Dynasty. Focuses on so much, but its sort of bullseye is in 1603, Elizabeth I dies. Her cousin, James VI of Scotland, accedes to the throne, and through somewhat, let's say, through both consanguinity and deceit, perhaps. The book is absolutely marvelous. Let's get right into it, because the Tudor Dynasty died about 70 years after it should have. So that's my statement. It should have never had Henry VIII. We should just had Henry VII and Arthur. God love him. Dr. Borman, you are one of the leading historians of the Tudor Stuart period. So much is written about it. We've had you on. We've had your friends on. It's so fascinating, but there always seems to be new ground. What led you to write this book?
You're so right. So we tend to think the Tudors, come on, what else can we find that's new? Because they've been so well trodden, if you like. Many historians have plundered the archives because it is the most enduringly popular period, whether or not, you like Henry VIII and what followed. And so you reach a stage where you think, what else can there be? And then something like this comes along and it just blows the whole thing apart yet again. So it was one of those moments where you kind of remember where you were. And I was halfway through writing a completely different book when I saw a news flash come up. I shouldn't have notifications on when I'm writing, but I did. And news from the British Library in London. To say that they'd made this quite earth-shattering discovery, that the narrative around what happened on Elizabeth's deathbed with her last gasp naming of James VI of Scotland as her heir was actually a work of fiction. They'd found that the source that historians had relied on for 400 plus years was actually rewritten on the orders of Elizabeth's successor to make it look like his succession to the Tudor throne was more predetermined than we now know it was. And that was, earth-shattering is not overstating it. For when it comes to Tudor history, this does change our whole perception of this smooth transition from Tudors to Stuarts. And it was William Camden was the man. He was the man who wrote that original account that historians have relied on. And I count myself in that number. I'm not just criticizing other historians. I was one of them. I thought Camden was reliable because he wrote at the time. And he was commissioned by Lord Burleigh, Elizabeth's chief advisor. And he had access to all these amazing sources to write his accounts of Elizabeth. But what we didn't know is that then on the orders of King James, he had to go back and rewrite key passages of the book to make it much more favourable to the new king. And it blew my mind. And I just had to stop the book I was writing and start The Stolen Crown, which is exactly what I did.
Okay, so it would be remiss of me not to ask what was the book you were writing? Just give us a hint.
Yeah, well, I just dropped a heavy hint, didn't I, by sort of hoping you'd ask me that, actually, so thank you. It was actually a novel called The House of Boleyn, and it's about the rise and fall of the Boleyn family. And I'm very happy to say I finished it, and it's coming out in May next year in the UK and in the US very shortly after that. So, yes, I did go back and I did finish that book.
Let's talk. There's so many people who are detailed in your book. Let's talk about just a few of them. So, James the First, he is King James the Sixth of Scotland. His mother is Mary, Queen of Scots, who us over here in the colonies always get confused with Bloody Mary. They are not the same person. He is the son of Mary, Queen of Scots, and he is the great grandson of Henry VII or great?
Oh gosh.
Well, it's Henry VII, and then it's Henry VII, and it's Margaret.
So it's Henry VII, Margaret. Then James V, Mary, Queen of Scots, James VI. There you go.
Whatever that is.
I can tell you the line, but maths was never my strong point.
So he becomes King of Scotland. Basically, is he 3?
He's actually 13 months old.
13 months old.
When his mother is forced to abdicate because she loses control in Scotland. And so he grows up not knowing Mary, Queen of Scots.
And he never met Queen Elizabeth.
No, never met. Isn't it funny how these relationships dominate history and the two people involved just don't meet? And it was the same with Mary, Queen of Scots and Elizabeth.
That's right.
They are the biggest factor in each other's lives for 30 years, but they never meet. And the same with James and Elizabeth. But the difference really... So, fun fact, James and Elizabeth sustained a longer correspondence than any two monarchs throughout the early modern period. So they wrote to each other for 30 years, an unbroken sequence of letters, and they are really, really fascinating. And actually what they show is that Elizabeth is almost trying to groom James as a king of England. She's trying to give him advice. Say, look, should you come to the throne, I'm not going to name you, but should you, this is how you do it. And of course, he's so arrogant and so anti-female rulers that he doesn't listen to a word of it. So he's only got himself to blame for the mess that he makes of being King of England.
You are listening to the Leaders and Legends podcast. We are discussing The Stolen Crown, Treachery, Deceit, and the Death of the Tudor Dynasty with Tracy Borman. She is Chief Historian of Historic Royal Palaces, Chief Executive of the Heritage Education Trust, and Chancellor and Professor of Tudor History at Lincoln Bishop University. You also, I believe, since the last time we talked, received an honor from the King. Just tell us a little bit about that, just real quick, and then we'll move on.
I was so thrilled. So yes, in the King's birthday honours, 2024, I was awarded an OBE, so Order of the British Empire, and for services to heritage. I was absolutely thrilled and astonished in equal measure. And yeah, I got to go to Windsor Castle this January, and it was Princess Anne who conferred the award on me. And yeah, definitely proudest moment ever. It's amazing. Absolutely thrilled.
Did you maintain that British stiff upper lip?
I did, but my mum didn't, who came with me.
That's wonderful. So we went through a little bit of the genealogy. So talk to us, please, just briefly, because I know there's so much you could say, but who was Mary, Queen of Scots, how did James, her son, get to become king before he's 2 years old?
Mm.
And how did Mary, Queen of Scots' exile and eventual execution influence Elizabeth's attitude towards the succession?
Yeah. Okay. So, in a nutshell, Mary, Queen of Scots, she's the daughter of King James V, who is the son of Margaret Tudor. So she's got decent royal blood from the English side and the Scottish side. So from the beginning, literally the day after Elizabeth comes to the throne, Mary starts to style herself Queen of England, which is quite a bold move. Doesn't get their relationship off to the best possible start. But Mary, she's then married to the King of France, but he dies pretty quickly after coming to the French throne. She goes back to Scotland. And unlike Elizabeth, who of course is the Virgin Queen, Mary immediately wants to marry again. And she kind of makes a series of disastrous choices. I think how I always like to differentiate Mary and Elizabeth, Mary rules with the heart, Elizabeth with the head. So Mary falls head over heels in love with Henry Lord Darnley. Nasty piece of work.
Mm-hmm.
And he ends up murdered. And then she marries the chief suspect in her husband's murder, Lord Bothwell. I like to imagine Elizabeth getting a box of popcorn, sitting back enjoying the show as her great rival makes such a mess of things in Scotland. Ultimately, she's forced to abdicate in favour of her 13-month-old son, James, who becomes James VI. She's taken prisoner, but she escapes and she makes the fateful decision to flee to England. I think she expects naively that Elizabeth will send her back to Scotland with an English army to reclaim her throne. Of course, Elizabeth's not stupid. She keeps Mary prisoner for almost 20 years. And meanwhile, James grows up not knowing his mother, but sort of inheriting her claim to the English throne. And particularly after Mary is executed for treason in 1587, then James he's the number one Stuart claimant to the throne. But I say that he does have a Stuart rival. And I think of all of the contenders who I researched for this book, Arbella Stuart was my favourite. Oh, what a tragic figure, but such an interesting woman. So yeah, she's descended from the elder of Henry VII's daughters, Margaret. And she's kind of raised by another great woman from the Elizabethan period, Bess of Hardwicke, who raises her to be a future queen, but also suffocates her, doesn't give her any freedom of action.
Yeah.
That it doesn't really help Arbella's character. She grows up very unstable and upsets just about everyone, including Elizabeth. So she has a difficult history, but she is really James's closest blood rival for the English throne. So fascinating woman.
And James knows this.
Oh, James knows it very much. And actually, he feels insecure about Arbella because, unlike him, she's been born on English soil. She was born on English soil. And that really matters because today, we think of ourselves as the United Kingdom. It's England and Scotland. It has been for 400 years. England and Scotland didn't see themselves like that. They weren't united. They hated each other. England saw Scotland as a foreign country and vice versa. So the fact that Arbella Stuart was born in England, that was a huge advantage over James, who'd been born in Scotland. And she was much more popular with Elizabeth's subjects than James was, actually. So yeah, he definitely kept a very close eye on Arbella. He even talked about marrying her at one point to kind of unite their claims, but that never happened. And then she ends up plotting once James is king and marries somebody else with a blood claim, the grandson of Lady Catherine Grey, and they are discovered and they're sent to the Tower. And Arbella ultimately dies in the Tower. So this is the other point I should make, I think, is that having a claim to the throne turns out to be much more of a curse than a blessing.
That's a great point.
Yeah, it's very dangerous.
That's why people ask, don't you ever read fiction? Don't you ever read novels? There's so many juicy novels. And I chuckle and I'm like, here's a book on the Tudors.
Yeah.
It reads better than any novel. It's all true.
Exactly.
And the only thing that's really missing is the rock and roll, because the sex, the drugs, and the treachery and all that they're all there.
Yes, all of it. You've got it all. And talk about truth stranger than fiction. You literally couldn't make it up when it comes to the Tudors. And this, for me, when I was researching and writing The Stolen Crown, it felt like a political thriller at times and a spy thriller. There are lots of spies in there with all the various Catholic plots, with these secret letters passing to and fro between James in Scotland and members of Elizabeth's government who are kind of on his side and wanting him to come to the throne. Oh, it honestly is it's like a thriller.
Everything's written in cipher, which I thought was
Oh, we love
fascinating.
a code.
Yes, we do.
Yeah.
So why not just, okay, you're Elizabeth, you become queen in 1558 when your half sister, Bloody Mary, dies. So there's all sorts of turmoil because of the Protestant religious thing. England ends up going the wrong way. No offense. And is a Protestant, it becomes a Protestant country, or continues down that path, maybe is a better way to say it. And Elizabeth never wants to get married. She's made this quite clear. Why not? Because this is a really interesting point of your book that is actually the first thing I dog-eared. Sorry, Dr. Talis.
Oh, no.
Is why not just name a successor and be done with it? But she has a very smart reason not to.
Yeah, she has an incredibly smart reason not to, because she has what we would call lived experience of being an heir in waiting. During her sister Mary's reign, that's Bloody Mary, as she's known, not Mary Queen of Scots, she was the obvious next in line because she's obviously the last of Henry VIII's children. And so everybody knew if Mary died without children, the throne would pass to her sister. And that's why Elizabeth became a focus for plots and rebellions against Mary, such as the Wyatt Rebellion very early in Mary's reign that aimed to get rid of Mary, put Elizabeth on the throne. And Elizabeth basically said, look, I'm never going to do this. I am not going to name an heir because the minute I do, I create a rival. And I don't want plots and conspiracies swirling around somebody who I've said is going to come to the throne. You know, people might try and force them onto the throne before I've left it. So she was absolutely clear and upfront about that. And I do think, to be fair to Elizabeth, it was the right thing to do, but it was also risky because now we look back and we know she reigned for 44 years. So you kind of think people could have relaxed. She's going to stick around. They didn't know that. They didn't know that at all because her three immediate predecessors had only managed 11 years on the throne between them. So they thought Elizabeth wasn't going to last. And she almost didn't. So I have just spent the day at work at Hampton Court Palace. Beautiful Tudor palace. I'm sure your listeners will be familiar. And there in 1562, so Elizabeth had only been queen for 4 years, when she fell ill at Hampton Court with smallpox. Nobody thought she was going to survive. They thought, this is it, another short reigning Tudor. And so her council met at Hampton Court in great alarm and were trying to agree between each other who is going to be king or queen. And they couldn't agree. You know, you get the Catholic half of the council, the Protestant half, and they're never going to agree. And it was a real crisis. And I think nobody ever got over this. So Elizabeth did pull through. She did survive. But it had given everybody such a fright that they weren't going to let the matter drop. And from that time, Elizabeth would be plagued with pressure from her council, her parliament saying, come on now, name your heir. So, you know, hats off to her. She managed to hold that pressure at bay for 40 long years.
Well, there was no dispute, and I want to get into other dynastic turnovers prior to this. There's no dispute when Henry VIII becomes king. Is it 1509?
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Okay. When his father, Henry VII, dies, then obviously Henry Tudor's older brother, Arthur Tudor, died before the Prince of Wales died before he could come to the throne. So when Henry VIII dies, 1547? No.
Correct.
Yeah. 1547. Yeah. So his son becomes Edward the
Sixth.
Don't tell him the sixth.
Sorry.
That's all right. Edward the Sixth. That's all right. Edward the Sixth, because Edward the Seventh is Edward the Caresser. And so, what'd you say?
I haven't heard that one before. That's good.
So then Edward the Seventh dies. He reigns for 6 years. It's very interesting that you say the 3 Tudor monarchs, because you're including Lady Jane Grey.
Nicola Tallis would not forgive me if I did not include Lady Jane Grey. Come on. We don't want to be in trouble.
I loved her book. She came on to discuss that book. It was so fascinating about Lady Jane Grey. But here's the other thing I want to mention. There is no Salic law.
No.
So that means, I would ask you please I know what it is, but please explain it for the podcast audience. So that means that the pool of potential monarchs or successors is infinitely wide and deep,
Yeah,
correct?
it is. There is no Salic law, i.e., there is no law that says it absolutely has to be a man who comes to the throne. But there is a long established tradition of the throne passing to the closest male relative, the eldest son in most cases, or failing that, then, an eldest brother or whoever it might be. And queens are seen as a disaster. I mean, Henry VIII would not have married 6 times if he'd been content with a daughter to carry on his line. As it was, of course, he did, and he kept trying until wife number 3 gave him Edward. Of course, the delicious irony being Edward only lasts 6 years, and then it's his forgotten younger daughter, Elizabeth, ultimately, who comes to the throne and does the best of all of them. But so, because there is no law, though, that says it absolutely has to be a man, yeah, it does widen the pool. And there are all sorts. So at any one point in Elizabeth's reign, there was an average of 15 people who could claim her throne. We're not just talking about a 1 or 2 horse race here, many different claimants. And I think it's worth simplifying it because it does get a bit complicated with how they're related. But nearly all the claimants are either related to Henry VII's elder daughter, Margaret, or his younger daughter, Mary. They're the kind of 2 lines that carry on through all the way up to the death of Elizabeth.
And on what basis of those matrilineal lines it is James's claim, James the Sixth claim,
So
to
James,
become king, that he asserts and says, well, of course you read the book and then, you read other histories and the whole time I'm reading it, I'm like, well, who else could it be? It's got to be him.
Well, that's because, we've been had for 400 years, and that's how it's kind of been written, as if, of course. The reason that it's seen as an of course is that purely in terms of blood claim, James has the edge because he is descended from the elder daughter, Margaret. So that's the other thing that counts in the succession, kind of the senior sibling or child, that they tend to have superiority. Whereas, for example, the sisters of Lady Jane Grey, they're descended from the younger of Henry VII's daughters, Mary. But, and there's a big but here, because actually Henry VIII had made it illegal for the Scots to come to the English throne. He'd passed several acts of, 3 acts of succession. And in his last will and testament, he had reiterated no Stuart will ever sit on the English throne. So he completely barred the descendants of Margaret, and he favoured those of his younger sister, Mary. So legally speaking, when Elizabeth breathed her last in 1603, we should have had Lady Catherine Grey's eldest son, Edward. We would have had Edward VII in 1603, not in 1901, with Edward the Caresser.
You like that?
I love it. I'm going to use that now. Claim that as my own.
It has the virtue of being accurate. As
Amazing.
many
It is,
things. Yeah. You're listening to the Leaders and Legends podcast. Our guest today is Dr. Tracy Borman. We are discussing her book, The Stolen Crown, Treachery, Deceit, and the Death of the Tudor Dynasty. It's terrific, and it's easily understandable. And it's not the easiest things with dukes and earls and kings and queens and cousins and so on and so forth. But as she always does, Dr. Borman makes it easily understandable and enthralling. If you don't believe me, the book has been described as, quote, full of twists, turns, intrigue, and deceit. The Stolen Crown has it all. This is Borman at her absolute finest, groundbreaking, and utterly compelling. And that is from Nicola Tallis.
We love Nicola.
Well, I would too. If she wrote that about the Leaders and Legends podcast, I'm going to have to talk to her about it. I want to go back to other dynasties. So this obviously isn't the first time a British or / English dynasty had turned over. 1066, I guess you could say 1154 when Henry II comes on. 1399 when Henry Bolingbroke, my man, comes back and takes the throne from the treacherous Richard II. So, and I don't know if I'm missing one, but in other words, the transition between dynasties is often fraught with
Yes.
intrigue, with violence, with death, with the what would be called regicide, I think.
Hmm.
So the people who were paying attention to the like as it got later in the 1590s, and clearly Elizabeth's struggling towards the end of her life in terms of her health. Did they pay attention to that sort of thing and go, look, we can't have this instability. We have to have. It's okay for Queen Elizabeth to play games when she's 40. She's 70 now or however she is. We can't play games any longer. We don't want a Battle of Hastings. We don't want someone landing at Ravenspur. How much did British monarchical history influence how people tried to make this change happen?
It was, such a good point, because sometimes I think as historians, we take too much of a kind of a long view, and we think, oh gosh, well, that had happened in the 1300s. So that must have been on people's minds, when actually they're just worried about whether they've got enough bread to eat or whatever it was. But actually, in Elizabeth's reign, there are numerous occasions when people are making direct reference to the Wars of the Roses and saying, we don't want to go back to that. We don't want civil war. There's going to be this change of dynasty when Elizabeth dies. And people really feared that England would just descend into chaos, just as it had, on the occasions you cited. And in particular with the Empress Matilda and Stephen in the 1100s, which people
The,
held up as an example of a bad queen.
one of my favorite terms, the anarchy.
The anarchy. I know, I love that too.
Love it.
So it was really, really front and center of people's minds. And you know what? People were so desperate to avoid this that, so Lord Burleigh, William Cecil, Elizabeth's closest advisor, he was so determined to avoid civil war when Elizabeth died that he came up with a scheme that was both radical and shocking. As early as 1562, so when Elizabeth almost died, he drew up plans for a republic, for what he called a kind of interregnum, so that if they absolutely could not decide who should be king or queen, if there was no clear candidate, then the Privy Council would take control. And this would be no longer a monarchy. It would be a republic, albeit a temporary one. He saw this as a temporary expedient, and then a monarch would eventually be crowned. But it's quite interesting. He was sort of way ahead of his time, because it'd be another 100 years before we got an actual republic, when there was civil war and King Charles I was executed, and we have Oliver Cromwell and the Republic. So it was quite far thinking of William Cecil, but I think he thought, these are desperate times. We need desperate measures. We've got to avoid civil war and turbulence that England has been through so many times when there's a change of dynasty.
How much worry was there? So the Armadas in 1588, that's not the first, that's not the only Armada. It's the first one, as you detail in the book. Scotland and France had the Old Alliance, which had been going on for decades against England. Obviously, England and France are the great love match of European history from 1066 on. But how much fear was there that a powerful foreign king, Spain perhaps, or France, Catholic, by the way, would show up to install someone and say, this is who it's going to be, and we've got the power to make it happen?
There was huge fear. I would like to introduce a lady called Isabella. She was the Infanta of Spain, the daughter of Philip II. She was a real contender for the throne. We don't really hear about her now. But in the later years of Elizabeth's reign, there was a huge fear of another Spanish invasion attempt. As you say, there wasn't just one armada. That was the famous one in 1588, but it was followed by a number of others. And there was an absolute paranoia in England that the country would be overrun by Spain, because Spain was one of the superpowers, right, in Europe at the time. The other one was France, and of course, the Holy Roman Empire that Spain's part of. And so the Infanta Isabella had a lot of military might behind her. She might not have had the strongest claim, although in a way her claim was better than the Tudors. You'll love this one, because she was related to the Plantagenets. So there you go.
My man, John of Gaunt.
Yeah, exactly. Your man, John of Gaunt. Whereas the Tudors, as you know, they were related to John of Gaunt, and his mistress, Catherine Swynford. So they were a bit illegitimate, actually.
And were legitimized later.
Legitimized later, you're quite right.
And John of Gaunt, one of his retainers, Sir Thomas Erpingham, is the man on whom I wrote my graduate thesis. So that's why. That's why. That's why John of Gaunt, Duke of Lancaster, is my guy, because he got my thesis subject started. And as we're coming up on October 25th, 1415, Erpingham was commander of the archers at Agincourt. And so, I'm always going to be biased towards John of Gaunt. But they did have a better claim. But then someone had a better claim during the War of the Roses than the descendants of John of Gaunt, because they were descended from Richard Plantagenet, who was Duke of York, I think. So,
right. Yeah.
The people of the time, contemporaneous to the end of Elizabeth's reign, they knew all this.
They knew it all, and they referred to it, and the Wars of the Roses was front and center in people's minds, and which really was one of the things that surprised me most in this book, in researching it, because, as I say, it's quite a long way before Elizabeth. They kind of come to an end really with the Battle of Bosworth, I suppose, 1485. Although there's some debate that the last battle in the Wars of the Roses was a bit later. But even so, we're talking at least 100 years by Elizabeth's death that the Wars of the Roses happened all that time ago. So, but people were very, very conscious of it. And I guess it was sort of passed down from generation to generation how terrible that time had been. At one point in the Wars of the Roses, the crown changed hands 6 times in 30 years. Who's king today? Oh, okay, yeah, it's Richard, or it's whoever else it might be.
And you don't think of it now because of the wars we've had in the 20th century, for example. But the Wars of the Roses were sanguinary, to say the least. They were vicious, pitched battles. I think, is it Barnet? Is still the bloodiest?
Barnet. Yeah,
the bloodiest battle on British soil.
Yes, that's correct. Yeah, absolutely. And it was, clearly it had left a deep impression on the people of England, and they passed down the memory of it to, their kids and then their kids, so that it was still being talked about, as I said. So people were desperate for Elizabeth to just settle the matter. But I do think she made the right decision, because it would have been divisive. It would have created a rival. But I suppose, much as I love Elizabeth, the one part for me is, why not on her deathbed? Kind of what she got to lose at that point. Why not just say it then? And I think that's why James, put words in the dead queen's mouth by having Camden write that she said it. And I think perhaps at that point, maybe a bit of vanity crept in. Elizabeth didn't want her subjects to imagine a world without her in it. So she just died, leaving the whole thing up in the air.
Is that her, our friend, and I'll stretch it and say she's my friend too, Susanna Lipscomb, says that Queen Elizabeth is overrated. I know. She actually even mentioned you when she said, "Don't tell Tracy."
Yeah, no.
Yeah, good Queen Bess. Is that her biggest failing? Not what you just said, not naming an heir on her deathbed.
I don't think so. I'm still I think perhaps at the end she could have done. But I think with Elizabeth, actions spoke louder than words. And I think she had tried to give James the advantage. I think she had gone against really the terms of her father's will and the acts of succession, in that she thought blood counted for more than legality. And she probably thought James was not ideal, but the best of a bad lot when it came to the claimants, because she actually persecuted the other claimants. Arbella, sisters of Lady Jane Grey. I could go on. There's a wonderful character called Lady Margaret Stanley. I'd encourage your listeners to look her up. A Catholic. And she ended up on the wrong side of Elizabeth. Whereas James, Elizabeth is sending him all these letters full of advice about how to be king. So I think she's trying to help him.
And he's just too damn dense.
He is just arrogant.
He's almost impenetrably dense.
I love that. I'm going to quote you on that again. He is. He's very, very set against women having a valid opinion. He just doesn't believe in it. And he thinks female rulers are a terrible thing, and that the people of England will just welcome him with open arms, because thank God we've got a man on the throne. And they do for a while. And then very, very quickly, James loses the love of his new subjects, because he brings with him a number of things that cause unease to the people of England. And I'm thinking of the witch hunts here. James is, the number one witch hunting king in history, whereas the people of England didn't really get behind that during Elizabeth's reign. He persecutes Catholics relentlessly. And he is Protestant, but he's the son of Mary Queen of Scots, this great Catholic figurehead. So the Catholics are bitterly disappointed and eventually rise up, and we get the gunpowder plot, trying to blow the Scottish king to the heavens, as they put it. And they also have some disquiet about James's private life, about all the time he's spending with his male favourites. And where he really should have listened to Elizabeth was in dealing with Parliament.
Yeah.
Because in Scotland, Parliament is basically like just a yes man to the king, just does whatever the king wants. It's not in England. And Elizabeth had tried to tell him that you need to kind of work with Parliament, not just rule it. And James didn't listen. And it went badly wrong. And it went even worse for his son Charles, of course, who, upset Parliament so much that it rose up against him. So I think this kind of lie that started the Stuart dynasty in England would actually have devastating consequences when you look forward to how this whole kind of partnership between monarchy and Parliament was just completely destroyed. And ultimately, the monarchy was destroyed. James should have listened to Elizabeth, in short.
You get the sense, I guess, hold on a second before we move on. We need to plug The Six Loves of James the First, Gareth Russell's book, which he's coming on the podcast to discuss. I thought it was going to be called Queen James, which I thought was beyond brilliant of a title.
It is.
But what I was sent was The Six Loves of James the First, and I haven't cracked it open yet because of all the other reading I have to do. But I'm really hoping that one of the six loves of James the First, as detailed in the book, is James the First.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Oh my God, you're in for a treat.
He's a brilliant writer.
Oh, and communicator. He is. He's like a stand-up historian. He's hilarious and so bright, so quick.
I think I've had him on two or three times, and I honestly can't get enough.
No, he's
of his writing or his time on the podcast.
Yeah.
Let's do a counterfactual. Queen Elizabeth gets married to whomever, and she has a child, a daughter. Would that daughter have been allowed to accede to the throne in 1603?
100%.
Even though we're tired of women on the throne.
Yeah.
There would not have been able to pass her by.
No. That's when you realize blood counts for everything. Like the direct line, the closest blood relative, that does count for everything. Even it overcomes gender. So if Elizabeth had had a daughter, we'd have had another queen. Even though there was somebody in Elizabeth's government at the time when she was dying said, England is wishing no more queens. We've had enough. We want a king. But they'd have gotten a queen, and probably nobody would have been saying things like that because they'd have known, this is going to be another queen. So yeah, 100%. I wish she had, in a way. Although I kind of think she made the right call not marrying. I love her quote, "I will have but one mistress here and no master." And she meant it. And I think actually she'd have given away a lot of her power if she'd married. And there's no way she'd waited a long time for that throne. She wasn't going to give any of it up.
Is Dr. Borman wear that phrase in your wedding vows?
It's in the prenup, yeah.
It is. It's in the Tudor Stuart prenup.
Exactly, yeah.
Let's focus on our remaining time with the actual succession, like the last year or so, all the intrigues, Elizabeth's dying, and, King James VI of Scotland is young, he's healthy, he's having children. One of them, unfortunately, dies. Henry, Prince of Wales. You talk about impactful premature deaths. That's got to be on the list. Anyway, so there's every reason to think that he could be a good king or so on and so forth, but they have agents. And one of the best parts of your book to me is how you detail James's intrigue and his spies and his agents in the Queen's court and around Parliament. Talk to us a little bit, please, about I should be king, but I need to actually make it happen. How does he make it happen?
Yeah, this is when we definitely get into the kind of spy thriller territory, and that James realizes that, he's got a strong blood claim, but it's not enough. He needs somebody on the inside helping him. And he chooses two men on opposite sides of Elizabeth's council. The Earl of Essex, Robert Devereux, quite a hot-headed man. He's a real favourite of Elizabeth, but very arrogant, not that clever. And then he chooses also Essex's great rival, Robert Cecil, son of Lord Burleigh, William Cecil, very opposite to Essex. He's not a swashbuckler. He's not a kind of heartthrob or impetuous or anything like that, but he is a steady, powerful, all-seeing minister and controls a spy network that's worth something. And so Essex eventually writes himself out of the story by rebelling against Elizabeth and gets executed at my other place of work, the Tower of London. And so really it's in Robert Cecil's hands. And so they have this secret correspondence. They call each other by code names and code numbers, actually. And they go to great lengths, James and Cecil, to smuggle their letters between Scotland and England because, of course, this is treason. Elizabeth has actually introduced a law banning all talk of the succession. And it's already treason to speak of the monarch's death. Henry VIII has ensured that. So they have to tread very, very carefully. I kind of think Elizabeth knew all about it. She was just turning a blind eye. She's pretty much still in control. But yeah, they correspond. And you see how Cecil is just putting all of the pieces in place to make sure it's going to be peaceful, smooth transition, down to drafting the proclamation of James's kingship well before Elizabeth's dead, and also putting guards on some of the key ports in England, and also strengthening the kind of military presence in certain key cities, because he thinks there's going to be uprisings and riots if the King of Scots comes to the throne. So he's thinking of everything. He's preparing, it from a military perspective, and he's also preparing politically for the accession of James. And there's a wonderful letter that one of the many letters that Cecil writes to James, where he starts the letter when Elizabeth is still alive and he ends it when she's dead. And you can see how he just smoothly changes from the present to the past tense when speaking about Elizabeth. And it always gives me chills seeing that letter. You just think there is Elizabeth's death there in that letter.
I'll make a statement and you tell me how wrong it is, because it's going to be wrong. Speaking of my wedding vows. Anyway, let me make this statement, because I was thinking about it as you were talking. The treachery, the presence, the influence of Mary, Queen of Scots, as regarding the succession, turns out to be basically irrelevant.
Yeah, kind of. It does, because it shouldn't have, really. But because there is a law that says any traitor or anyone connected to a traitor can never inherit the crown of England. But Elizabeth makes a little bit of a tweak to that law so that she says that it's just the traitor, not associates. Because James is super worried about this. He doesn't really seem to care that much about his mother's execution, except he's worried it's going to damage his claim to Elizabeth's throne. And Elizabeth takes these very subtle moves to make sure that, legally speaking, Mary's execution makes absolutely no difference to James's claim. And so she does make this change, and it's an important change, because otherwise I think James would have struggled to claim her throne. Yeah, I'm going to agree with you. I don't think actually Mary, Queen of Scots' treason, her execution, did really have a deep impact on James's bid for Elizabeth's throne.
And have Tudor Stuart historians ever figured out how a queen of a foreign country can be executed for treason by another country?
Oh, well, she left a bit of a paper trail, did Mary. Yeah, but there were questions over this, and she's an anointed queen. Although she was a deposed queen, she was no longer Queen of Scotland when she was executed. Even though we still call her Mary, Queen of Scots, she hadn't kept hold of her title in Scotland, and she had committed treason that was provable by that letter she sent to Anthony Babington, the Catholic conspirator, telling him, set the 6 gentlemen to work. In other words, the 6 men he'd lined up to murder Elizabeth and put Mary on the throne. And you can see it's called the gallows letter because Walsingham's agent seizes that letter and he draws a gallows on it. Gotcha. At last.
But she's an anointed queen of an entirely different country, as you said at the beginning of the podcast. They couldn't stand each other. It wasn't like it is now. There's no United Kingdom.
No.
So isn't that kind of like Prussia executing Napoleon for treason?
Yeah, I guess it's a big deal. And that's why we should put a bit of context here in that Mary's execution in 1587, that was after basically almost 20 years of Elizabeth's council trying to get her executed. They wanted her dead a long time before Elizabeth did. And she always refused to put Mary on trial, to act against her, because she said, she's an anointed queen. There's insufficient evidence. And she was absolutely right. She knew what a big deal it was to put Mary to death. It was huge, absolutely huge. I think there was perhaps something in it with Elizabeth of a personal nature, because the last anointed queen in England to be put to death was her own mother. And I think that might have just figured in her thinking, in her resistance to take action against Mary. But even she couldn't argue with the kind of black and white treason she saw in Mary's letter to Babington. So she had to go. But then I love how Elizabeth tries to say, oh, I didn't mean for her to be executed.
That's
I'm
right.
So sorry. I didn't know what I was signing, or I didn't order it to be issued. It was my council. I'm going to fine them. I'm going to put them in prison. It wasn't me, honestly.
What a politician.
Yeah, nobody really believes her. I don't know.
We have just a couple minutes left. So let me ask you two quick questions. One, after James I becomes king of England in 1603, you mentioned Gunpowder Plot, which I think is in November.
Yeah.
November 3rd, 6th?
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's one attempt to pop him off the throne. A, were there others? B, I have read on more than one occasion a historian assert the Tudor Dynasty is the most dispositive, influential dynasty in the history of England. And B, do you agree with that? C, if not them, whom?
Okay, so I'll start with the other plots. There were other plots to dethrone James. Pretty much as soon as he came to the throne, there was something called the by-plot, then the main plot, and there was a lot of support for Arbella Stewart once James was on the throne. And that is really testified to by the fact that Arbella Stewart escaped from the Tower when James made her prisoner. And I can tell you, because I worked there, that in 1,000 years, only 11 people have escaped from the Tower. So she must have had help. She was popular in England. So yeah, there were other attempts to dethrone James. As for the Stuarts, yeah, I kind of agree. They weren't great for the British monarchy. Well, maybe we should say it's Stuarts of two halves. James and Charles I, absolutely not good for the monarchy. And in fact, Charles I destroyed the monarchy ultimately. I've got a soft spot for Charlie II, the merry monarch. He's a good time guy.
I hate to say this to sound like well, I guess it's just true. That's who my family is descended from.
Oh, I love him.
Charles II and Elizabeth.
Wow.
So we last time my girlfriend Jacqueline and I went to England, or Scotland. We went to Edinburgh last November. We went down to Raby Castle, which is the Vane family castle, and we got a terrific tour. And they showed us the genealogy. And so, yeah, Restoration Charlie's illicit affair with Elizabeth is where the Vanes start.
No way. That is very cool. I am okay. Well, good, because there's a reason we get on. I've always liked Charles II.
He just kind of wanted to have a good time, even though
he was a good time guy, and also he read the room. Like, he knew Parliament was now in charge. He kind of went with it, but he gave the people the kind of glamour of monarchy that they really wanted, and so did another Stuart, the last Stuart, Queen Anne. Yeah. And she gets a hard time, and people just focus on her pregnancies, and the film The Favourite has made people focus just on her love life. But she was a really effective monarch and really restored some of the mystique of monarchy. And by the way, she did in 1707 what James I failed to do when he came to the throne in 1603. She finally united England and Scotland. Formally, there was a union. It took over 100 years. So I think that the early Stuarts, yeah, definitely not positive. Later Stuarts, yeah, they were okay, actually.
Could you argue that the King James Bible is one of the most influential and important tracts in the history of the world?
I don't know if I'd go that far. I think it was, no, it was influential. And of course, it's still in use in
Right.
many parts of the world today. So yeah, it was an enduring legacy, but I'm not sure it really kind of is enough to overshadow the less positive aspects of James's reign and what followed, in particular with his son Charles. But both men should really have sat down, read Elizabeth's letters, treated them like the gospel, and just followed them word for word. But of course, neither did. They just did it.
Impatience.
Yeah.
Impatience. Last question. I am going to guess that your opinion of William Camden has taken a significant hit as a result of this sort of treachery or mislabeling of history. Is there anyone whose opinion rose as a result of writing this book?
Okay. Do you know what? My opinion of William Camden rose. And I know that sounds weird given that
Really?
we now know that he lied. But before then, I'd kind of seen him almost as Elizabeth's apologist. And, most of his account of Elizabeth is very complimentary of her. It's just, obviously, he's rewritten sections, particularly the succession. And he also makes Mary Queen of Scots more favourable when James commands him. But he really came to life for me when researching this book, because I realised what a man of integrity he was, what a meticulous historian. He really took his time researching his books, and he was very well respected. And you can see how it kills him having to rewrite it. He doesn't want to, he tries to stand out against James, but you can't ultimately disobey the king. And so he has to do this. And he's writing, we have this, what really brought him to life for me, we have his correspondence with a fellow historian where he's basically saying, this is killing me. I'm falsifying history. And the king is sending all of my original text back, and he's changed everything. And I'm having to publish this, and I don't want to. So I love it that he kind of gets sweet revenge by taking his merry little time over this rewrite. And he publishes the account in 2 installments. The second installment doesn't appear until 1625, and that's the bit that includes the succession. And it comes out when both Camden and James are dead. I think it's kind of sweet in a way, because it actually doesn't help James in his lifetime, but it has made him seem like the logical successor, the natural successor for 400 years since then. So yeah, I really ended up changing my opinion of Camden more than anybody else. And I really, really liked and respected him. The other thing I would urge your readers to do if they get chance, now it feels like it's hiding in plain sight all these years. He included a preface in his book about Elizabeth that is basically screaming at the reader not to believe the book. And now I read it with different eyes. It literally says, many mistakes are in this book. Please don't take it at face value. And he ends by begging somebody in future, come back, look at this again, and write a more accurate history. So he was laying all these clues, and we've just disregarded them for 400 years.
What do you think? Because you stand equal to and on the shoulders of giants before you, historians. What do you think Geoffrey Elton or J.G. Scarisbrick would say about some of this revelation?
Oh gosh, yeah. They are giants. Absolutely. Yeah, they would be fascinated by it, of course. Obviously, Elton is more known for Henry VIII and Cromwell. In fact, Elton, really, to his credit, he's the first one who really shows Cromwell in a positive light. He's always been dismissed as a villain. Sorry, I know you're not a big fan. But
we're kind of partial to Sir Thomas More here on the
I get it. But I'm Team Cromwell, so we'll agree. But I think they'd have been quite astonished. But I think that's the nature of being a historian. You can't live on ego as a historian. When something is discovered that disproves something you've said, you have to own it. And right. I guess this book of mine is all about owning it. And so, I absolutely make no secret of the fact I had believed Camden's account along with scores of other historians. But now I absolutely see the truth. And it's been a joy to kind of bring to light the real story of the Tudor Stuart transition and how the crown was not gifted, it was in fact stolen.
You have been listening to Leaders and Legends, a podcast presented by Veteran Strategies, an Indiana-based public relations enterprise. We are also a federally certified, veteran-owned small business. I am your host, Robert Vane. Our producer is Chris Spangle. As always, all our podcast interviews are dedicated to the legacy and generosity of our favorite Scot, P.E. McAllister. Our guest today, Dr. Tracy Borman. She is the author of The Stolen Crown, Treachery, Deceit, and the Death of the Tudor Dynasty. We are thrilled, as we always are, to have her on the podcast, discuss her brilliant writings. And if you don't believe me, quote, you think you know about the Tudor succession? Think again, because this riveting book reveals the facts behind one of history's best kept and most astonishing secrets. Tracy Borman has written a powerful tale based on new research, one that will overturn our understanding of the dawn of the Stuart Age for good. Compelling and brilliant. Don't miss it. Alison Ware. That's just got to really warm your heart because she is at the top of the mountain.
My God. And Alison is the reason I'm a historian, really. Certainly the reason I'm a published historian. She is phenomenal. I am her number one fan. And so that, you can imagine what that meant to me, receiving that endorsement. That's like kind of Mick Jagger telling a kind of local band who just play in their local pub that they're really amazing. She's a rock star to me.
Sarah Gristwood, who was also on the Leaders and Legends podcast in the past, she said wonderful things too. Compelling and brilliant is how Ms. Ware describes your book, but that's how I'll describe Tracy Borman. She's a wonderful writer. You can tell from this podcast, she's incredibly generous with her intellect, a delightful personality. You should pick up all her books. I can't wait for the next one and hope that you'll come back on. Dr. Borman, thank you so much for coming on the podcast again.
It has been an unending pleasure. And of course, I'll be back like a shot if ever you'd like me to. So thanks for having me.
Thank you very much for listening to Leaders and Legends, brought to you by Veteran Strategies Incorporated. If you want to contact us about this program or our menu of public relations services, please send us an email at robert@veteranstrategies.com. That's robert@veteranstrategies.com.